Hey everybody, welcome back to VideoMess. So today we're continuing the series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project, and the Sega Saturn Core has been updated again, so we're going to be doing some more tests. Some games were included in SRG320's patch notes on GitHub, and some games you've been requesting as well, because the Sega Saturn Core keeps getting better and better, and very shortly I'm going to be running some videos on single game tests that I consider basically perfect on the Core. Before we get too far involved, though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. If you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But Croc has seen a ton of improvement since the last time we tested this game, and on the most recent Core it is even better. Now that we have gourad shading completely within the Core, the overall look and feel of Croc looks exactly like it should if you're running it on real hardware. Now this is still Croc, it has tank controls, and it can be quite difficult to actually navigate around this game if you didn't play it back in the day. But it is a fun time. I've always had a special place in my heart for Croc, probably because I played it back when it was new. I know it's not going to live up to the same hype as something like Super Mario 64 or Crash Bandicoot, but there is a decent amount here to love with Croc, even if I do make Andy D test this one because I know he hates it. But honestly, what you're seeing here seems very close to what you'd be getting on real Sega Saturn hardware. There's nothing in the image that doesn't look correct to my eye. The gameplay, the controls, all of the graphics just seem to be drawing like you would expect them to and playing like you'd expect them to, which is a good time, because this is a game that's gone through multiple different improvements over time. This used to freeze almost constantly, then we would have it, but all of the textures would be completely in the wrong order. A lot of different changes on Croc to get it to this point in time, and now it's a game that you can basically just sit down and play, and honestly that is, at least in my opinion, a fun time to do. You'll see here, even as we look at the lava, these little 2D effects of the lava bubbling up are drawing exactly correctly. All of the little details that make up the world of Croc are coming through, and in the cutscenes here, this is a place where the Core used to love to either freeze or shore the incorrect graphics. Now it just seems to be running perfectly fine. You get the story, which is charming and amusing in a Crash Bandicoot-like way. So it's awesome to see these improvements come to the Core, and the Sega Saturn Core keeps improving by leaps and bounds. It is getting so good, but of course there is still room for this Core to update, because even though the new version is an update as of like 10 days ago or so, this is still an active development Core, so I can't wait to see what the next update brings. But this one has brought a lot of great features and a lot of improvements into a lot of games. And of course, you know I'm going to text Grandia next, because everyone keeps asking for more footage of this game, and I think it's just down to the fact that the overworld in this is so incredibly charming. This may be one of the best 3D looking games of its generation, mixing the 2D assets with the 3D world all in real time. You will see there that after we had that conversation there was a little bit of slowdown, and I do not remember that happening on real hardware, so it seems like every once in a while the Core will still slow down compared to real hardware, at least in the overworld of Grandia. But tell me down below, do you remember these slowdowns on original hardware? Because it has been a few years since I've actually played this game, and when I tried to, I never got a full playthrough in because I did get busy. But this just looks incredible on the Core, and that's down to the art style of Grandia. All of these pastel colors, these rust tones, these inky jean blues, they just look so good on Sega Saturn hardware, and they look as good here today on the Sega Saturn Core. And I know this is one of the best RPGs of all time on the Saturn, but honestly for me it's one of the best looking Sega Saturn games. I just love the overworld, how it is in real time, how you can spin the camera around, and how it almost feels like you're running around a little tilt shift lens world trying to navigate the world of Grandia. But that's just me and how I look at it, so tell me down below where you would rank this in the overall best Saturn 3D games rankings, because I feel like it's up near the top, but I don't know if anyone else would agree with me there. But all of the story, all of the graphics, all of the gameplay are intact here on the current Sega Saturn Core. It just seems to be that every once in a while the game will slow down, and it seems to be right after you exit a conversation, so it might just be trying to queue up the next bit of code it needs to chew on to spit out some gameplay, and it might just be lagging ever so slightly there. But as we get inside here in the interior, even all the dithering steam effects on that bubbling cauldron in the back are working. Obviously it's not a true transparency, it's just a dithering pattern, but it looks exactly like you would expect it to. This entire interior area looks absolutely stunning, and as we go up to this room here, all of the animations, all of the text transitions, all of the 2D assets mixed with the 3D, are just presenting themselves like you would think. And that's the most important thing for me in Grandia. It's just such a pretty and unique game. I want to see it redone in the way that I remember it. So on the current Sega Saturn Core, this looks to me like it's like 95 to 96% of the way there, minus those slight slowdowns I don't remember. Now this is not a game that I've heard anyone play to completion yet, so I don't know if I would go for it honestly right now, but you can transport your saves to new cores as well, so if you get stuck with a crash or a hang, you can always just use that save on the next core. Let's move over to Andretti Racing. This is not my favorite game, but it's one that's seen improvements on the most recent core, both visuals and sound. Listen for 45 seconds and I'll be right back.
Watch for that green flag, and here we go.
Honestly, the soundtrack to Andretti Racing is not very good whatsoever in my opinion, but there's a very specific reason I let you listen to that. In previous cores, a lot of times, some of those sound effects like engine noises would become so loud that they would end up clipping the audio channels. That's basically when the volume goes so high that the channel clips and you hear distortion, cracks, or other really unpleasant to your ear sounds. Here today in the current core, that is not happening, and that is a big deal because the sound side of Sega Saturn was an issue for a long time with all of the cores. It is complex hardware. The overall Saturn architecture is a little bit of a bear to try to tame, but we're getting such better results here, and I would say Andretti Racing's never been the best controlling game either, but this is one of the games that SRG 320 was talking about in the patch notes when he updated the core, and that means that something that fixed Andretti Racing in part is also going to improve other games, because it's not like some of these fixes just solve one single issue. When you see the patch notes and you see a game mentioned and something that was fixed, of course it fixes that, but it probably also fixes 10 other issues no one was even aware existed, because so many of these code updates that fix one problem really are fixing the problem across the entire core. So any game that would utilize that specific function or call to any bit of the Sega Saturn hardware would see an improvement based on that code being cleaned up. But you tell me down below, did you play Andretti Racing back in the day? Because I would be curious. Now on the X-Men vs Street Fighter front, we are seeing improvements. The game is still not playable, but it is getting better. Basically, this used to have crazy colors and you wouldn't really be able to see the attract sequence without your eyes basically being in pain. Now that works 100% of the time, every single time, and when it actually goes into the gameplay attract sequence, this also works. So it seems like the engine can run. There seems to be something with controller inputs or otherwise that seems to be freezing the core out, but that is just a presumption on my part. But it used to be that when you would get into the character selection screen, this is when the game would tend to freeze. Now you can go through this 10 out of 10 times, select whatever characters and modes you want, and you will load into the game. And I'm not cutting this just so you can see exactly what it looks like. From here, when this would load in, it would usually freeze right now before you would ever get character control, or the second it gave you control, it would freeze then. Now you'll see like 4 or 5 attacks have been unleashed, and now in just a moment the core is going to freeze. So while this is not a playable experience, there are improvements, and it's a game that everyone asks for every single time, and you'll see the freeze right there. So it's one of those things, it's getting better, but it's still not there. Now, one that everyone requested to see, and you guys are going to have to explain this one to me, is Yumimi Mix, or Remix, because this is in English. This is a very cartoony visual novel on the Sega Saturn, and it is one of the stranger titles, even if you do read English now with the translation, but people kept asking if this was working on the core, and you guys are just going to have to explain that to me down below. I'm happy to test whatever you want, but I was surprised to see the requests on this one. And the entire intro sequence is just one big karaoke song that you can sing to, and you even have the English down below. Now I get that there's totally an audience for these visual novel style games and people are curious, and this one definitely seems to be very wacky and colorful, but honestly I've never played this game whatsoever. I did know that it existed on the Saturn, but honestly it's just one of those things. There was information tucked away in my brain, but nothing I ever gave a shot to. So as far as how this is running in the current core, it seems to be running totally fine, but I don't have the experience whatsoever to tell you if anything would be off on this one. I watched a few YouTube captures on original hardware, and they seem to adhere exactly like what I'm seeing here on the core, but I just don't really have that knowledge base. But honestly, it is another game that works on the core, And that's the thing about testing the cores. You don't just test the most popular games of all time, you test every single game if you can, because you want to make sure that everything is running. And it's always fun to test a fan translation as well, because that's not the original game. It has been changed and expanded upon. And this was another game that in previous core patches SRG 320 did mention, so there must have been something in Umimi Mix that caused the core to improve once that bug was fixed. And honestly, even though this isn't really exactly my type of game, I'm sure it's going to make somebody happy out there to know that not only is it in English, but it works on the current Sega Saturn core. But leave me a comment down below and tell me, did you know this game existed? Is this the first time you're ever seeing it? Or are you one of the people that actually requested it being tested? Because I would be wondering about that. And of course, if you have other game requests, leave me a comment down below and tell me, and I will try to get to each and every one of them in due course. But if you're into Umimi Mix and you want to play it in English on the current core, it seems to be rock solid stable. I don't know if it would freeze 2 hours in. It's definitely not the game I'm going to do some long-term testing on, but for the people that were curious and the patch notes, it's working in the current core. And that's the current situation as of the current Sega Saturn core as I record this voiceover. I will have way more tests coming up, and I'm going to start doing some single game tests as well on games that I consider perfect or near perfect on the core. So if there's any single game test you want to see, again, leave me that comment down below. But SRG 320 continues to work on Sega Saturn, giving us frequent updates with some great patch notes for GitHub, so we know exactly what to test. But short of that, go grab your MiSTer, play some Sega Saturn, have some fun, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.